The Hypogeum mystery. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It's the best way to support this channel. This place messes with your head in the best possible way. Picture walking down into the limestone under Malta, step by step, leaving sunlight behind, and realizing that everything around you was carved by human hands more than 5,000 years ago. No metal tools, no written language we know of, just intention, patience, and an understanding of stone that still feels alien. The Hypogeum of Ħal-Saflieni isn't just an underground temple. It's a psychological experience, like the builders were experimenting not only with space, but with the human mind itself. When people first hear about it, they imagine a cave. That's the wrong image. This is architecture. Rooms, corridors, chambers stacked across multiple levels. Some shaped to mimic above-ground temples, complete with carved doorways and ceilings that look like they're holding up invisible weight. And it goes down, deeper than you expect, into darkness where sound behaves strangely and your sense of time starts to slip. You can feel it when you're there, even in photos. This wasn't made randomly, it was planned. One of the things that always gets me is how intentional the acoustics are. There's a chamber often called the oracle room, and if you speak in a low resonant voice, the sound doesn't just echo, it blooms, it wraps around you, it vibrates through your chest. Modern tests have shown that certain frequencies resonate through the entire complex, especially around the range of a deep male voice. That's not an accident, that's design. So the question is, why? Were they chanting, praying, inducing altered states? Or were they discovering something about sound and consciousness that we're only now circling back to with modern neuroscience? Then there's the human remains. Thousands of individuals, bones layered and rearranged, suggesting long-term ritual use. This wasn't a simple burial site. Bodies were moved, curated, interacted with over time. That changes the story completely. You're not looking at a place of the dead only. You're looking at a place where the living repeatedly returned, where memory and ritual overlapped. Imagine walking into a chamber, knowing generations before you stood in the same spot, hearing the same resonant hum in the stone, feeling the same vibration in your body. The so-called sleeping lady figurine adds another layer of mystery. A small sculpture of a reclining figure, peaceful, heavy, grounded. Is she sleeping, dreaming, dead, or in some trance state? The proportions are exaggerated, almost symbolic rather than literal. It's tempting to read modern ideas into it, but whatever she represents, she clearly mattered. She suggests that the people who built the Hypogeum were deeply concerned with states of being that weren't just awake and active. Rest, transition, transformation. Those ideas feel baked into the stone itself. And here's where it starts to get really strange. The Hypogeum mirrors above-ground temples in Malta almost perfectly. Same curves, same trilithon-style doorways, same proportions. Why recreate a surface temple underground? That implies a symbolic descent, a journey inward, maybe even a ritual death and rebirth. You go down into the earth, into darkness, into resonance and silence, and then you come back out changed. That idea shows up in cultures all over the world, but this is one of the earliest physical expressions of it we know. There are also chambers that seem intentionally unfinished, rough compared to others. That raises questions. Were they expanding it over generations? Did something stop them? Or were certain areas meant to remain raw, closer to the natural cave, while others were refined and ceremonial? It feels less like a single-purpose structure and more like a living project, evolving alongside the society that used it. What really sticks with me is how controlled access was. This wasn't a place everyone just wandered into. Narrow passages, hidden turns, spaces that force you to slow down, to crouch, to adjust your body. Movement itself becomes part of the ritual. You don't rush through the Hypogeum. It makes you earn every chamber. That's powerful. That's intentional psychology through architecture. And then there's the timing. This was built before Stonehenge, before the pyramids. Let that sink in. While we often frame prehistoric people as primitive, this place quietly demolishes that idea. The level of planning, the symbolic coherence, the technical skill, all of it points to a culture that understood itself and its rituals deeply. We just don't have their words anymore, only their stone. Sometimes I wonder if the real mystery isn't how they built it, but why we feel so unsettled by it now. Maybe it's because the Hypogeum reminds us that ancient people weren't just surviving. They were exploring consciousness, community, death, and meaning in ways that feel uncomfortably sophisticated. Standing in those chambers, or even imagining them, you get the sense that you're not just looking into the past. You're being looked back at, across thousands of years, by minds that were asking some of the same questions we're still wrestling with today. Another thing that doesn't get talked about enough is the sheer physical commitment required to carve something like this underground. You're removing tons of limestone with stone tools, in cramped conditions, with limited light. That means this place wasn't just sacred symbolically, it was sacred economically. Time, labor, risk, all invested into something that doesn't directly feed or shelter people in a conventional way. That tells you belief was central, not optional. Whatever they thought happened in these chambers mattered enough to justify enormous effort over centuries. There's also evidence that light played a role. Oil lamps would have cast soft, shifting shadows across curved walls, making the space feel alive. Combine that with chanting or low-frequency sound, and you're looking at a fully immersive sensory environment: sight, sound, movement, even smell, all carefully shaped. Today we'd call that experiential design. Back then, it was ritual technology, and it raises the possibility that people entered altered mental states here, guided by architecture rather than substances. Some researchers have suggested the Hypogeum functioned as a kind of oracle, a place where answers were sought. If that's true, it reframes the acoustics completely. A voice resonating through the chambers would feel disembodied, larger than any individual. Authority without a visible source. That's a powerful tool in any culture. It could unify people, legitimize leaders, or reinforce shared myths. Again, that's not primitive thinking. That's social engineering in the most neutral sense of the term. And yet, for all the theories, the Hypogeum resists being pinned down. It doesn't scream its purpose at you. It whispers. It invites speculation. It feels like a place designed to hold ambiguity, not eliminate it. Maybe that's the point. Maybe certainty wasn't the goal. Experience was. Presence was. Participation was. What fascinates me personally is imagining the silence down there after everyone left. No lamps, no voices, just stone and darkness. The Hypogeum would sit, sealed, holding memory in negative space. And then, thousands of years later, we stumble back into it, with flashlights and theories, trying to translate something that was never meant to be written down. There's humility in that realization. Even today, access is tightly controlled. Only a handful of people can enter each day, partly for preservation, but it also preserves something else, the sense that this place isn't casual. You don't scroll past it. You don't consume it quickly. You prepare. You descend. You listen. In a world that's loud and fast, that alone feels almost radical. The Hypogeum forces a question we don't ask often enough. What if the ancient world wasn't less complex than ours, just complex in different directions? What if meaning, ritual, and shared experience were technologies as important as tools and weapons? Standing at the edge of this mystery, it's hard not to feel that we've lost something along the way, even as we've gained so much. So when people ask why the Hypogeum matters, why we should care about an underground structure from a vanished culture, I think the answer is simple. It reminds us that being human has always meant more than survival. It has always meant searching for connection, for transformation, for something that echoes beyond the surface of everyday life. And in the depths beneath Malta, that echo is still there, waiting for anyone willing to listen. There's a quiet discomfort in realizing how little we truly know. We can scan the stone, measure the chambers, model the acoustics, but intention remains slippery. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the Hypogeum survives precisely because it doesn't hand us clean answers. It forces us into the same position as its original visitors, uncertain, receptive, attentive. You don't dominate this space with explanation. You meet it on its own terms. I keep coming back to the idea that this was a place of preparation. Preparation for death, for leadership, for adulthood, for contact with something larger than the self. A liminal space. Not here, not there. In between. Those are the places where cultures often do their deepest work. And that might be the most modern feeling thing about it. Even now, we're desperate for spaces that allow us to slow down and reflect, to step outside constant stimulation and reconnect with meaning. So maybe the mystery isn't meant to be solved. Maybe it's meant to be entered, respected, and carried with you. The Hypogeum doesn't belong to the past alone. It belongs to anyone willing to descend into questions without demanding immediate answers. As I think about it now, what stays with me most is the courage it took to imagine something like this in the first place. To believe that stone could hold memory, that sound could shape experience, that darkness could be meaningful rather than feared. That's not ignorance. That's a different kind of intelligence. And standing in the shadow of that realization, you can't help but feel smaller, and at the same time, strangely connected. The Hypogeum endures as a reminder that long before history was written, humanity was already asking how to touch the invisible, how to give shape to the inner world, and how to leave behind something that could still speak when voices were gone. In that sense, every unanswered question isn't a failure of knowledge, but an invitation to listen more carefully, to slow down, and to remember that mystery itself can be a form of understanding. And that idea, that mystery itself is a form of understanding, might be the most important thing the Hypogeum offers us. We live in a time where answers are expected instantly, where uncertainty feels like weakness. But this place was built around uncertainty. It was shaped to hold questions, not resolve them. And that tells you something profound about the people who made it. Think about what it means to go underground on purpose. Across cultures, descent is never casual. You descend into the underworld, into the womb of the earth, into the realm of ancestors and spirits. It's symbolic, yes, but symbolism only works when people believe in it deeply enough to act on it. The Hypogeum wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical enactment of belief. Every step downward was a commitment to that worldview. There's also something unsettling about how carefully human remains were integrated into the space. Bones weren't hidden away. They were part of the environment. That suggests a relationship with death that's very different from ours. Not denial, not fear, but familiarity. The dead weren't gone. They were present. They shared space with the living. That kind of worldview would change how you think about time, responsibility, and identity. You're not just an individual passing through life. You're a temporary expression of a much longer continuum. And imagine being a child in that culture, knowing that one day you'd descend into this place, guided by elders, hearing stories echo off stone walls that your ancestors carved. That experience would imprint itself on you forever. It would shape how you understood your place in the world. We underestimate how powerful shared ritual can be because we've replaced it with abstraction. They didn't talk about meaning. They walked into it. The precision of the carvings keeps pulling me back. Straight lines where straight lines shouldn't be easy. Curves that feel intentional and balanced. This wasn't trial and error. It was skill passed down, refined over generations. Which raises another question. How was knowledge transmitted? Without writing, everything had to be embodied. Techniques learned by doing, meanings learned by participation. Lose the chain of practice, and the knowledge disappears. Maybe that's what eventually happened. Not conquest, not catastrophe, but forgetting. Some people like to jump to extreme explanations, lost civilizations, outside influence, impossible technology. I get the impulse, but I don't think it's necessary. What's more unsettling is that humans, given enough time, focus, and shared belief, can accomplish things that feel impossible from the outside. The Hypogeum isn't evidence of something non-human. It's evidence of what humans are capable of when survival isn't the only story they're telling themselves. There's also the question of why Malta, specifically, became such a center for this kind of monument building. An island forces awareness of limits. Resources are finite. Space is finite. That can push cultures inward, toward symbolic systems that reinforce cohesion. When you can't expand endlessly outward, you deepen inward. The Hypogeum feels like the ultimate inward turn, literally and figuratively. What fascinates me is how modern visitors often report feeling emotional down there, even without knowing the full backstory. Something about the space hits on a level below intellect. That suggests the builders understood human perception intuitively. They knew how scale, sound, and enclosure affect the nervous system. Today we talk about environments causing calm or stress. They were already doing that 5 millennia ago, with stone and silence. And then there's the idea of thresholds, doorways carved into rock that lead nowhere physically, but clearly mean something symbolically. False doors show up in other ancient cultures too, often representing passage between worlds. In the Hypogeum, those carved thresholds feel like invitations, not to walk through with your body, but with your imagination, to acknowledge that there are boundaries you can sense but not cross. I keep thinking about the people who maintained this place. Someone had to keep lamps filled, pathways cleared, rituals remembered. That implies roles, specialization, perhaps even a priesthood, not in the later, hierarchical sense, but as keepers of knowledge. And knowledge in this context wasn't information, it was experience. You didn't read about the Hypogeum, you underwent it. Eventually, though, the ritual stopped. The chambers fell silent. The entrances were sealed or forgotten. Life moved on above ground. That transition is almost as mysterious as the construction itself. What changes in a culture cause a place like this to be abandoned? A shift in belief? New rituals replacing old ones? Environmental pressures? We don't know. And again, that gap forces humility. Not every story ends with a clear conclusion. When the Hypogeum was rediscovered in modern times, it collided with a completely different mindset. We approached it as an object to be studied, categorized, protected. Necessary? Yes, but also incomplete. Something is lost when a ritual space becomes a museum. Even with careful lighting and guided visits, you're seeing a shadow of what it once was. And maybe that's unavoidable. Maybe the Hypogeum's true function only exists when a culture shares the beliefs that give it life. Still, there's value in its survival. It stands as a counterargument to the idea that progress is linear, that intelligence increases steadily over time. Instead, it suggests that different eras excel in different dimensions. We've mastered speed, scale, and abstraction. They mastered presence, symbolism, and communal experience. One isn't inherently better. They answer different needs. I also can't help but see the Hypogeum as a warning. Not in a dramatic, apocalyptic sense, but as a reminder of fragility. Entire worldviews can vanish, leaving behind only stone and speculation. What parts of our own culture would make sense to someone 5,000 years from now? What would they misinterpret? What would they never even think to ask? That perspective makes our certainties feel less solid. There's a strange comfort in that, too. The idea that meaning doesn't have to be permanent to be real. The people who built the Hypogeum weren't trying to be remembered by us. They were addressing their own time, their own questions. The fact that we're still moved by it is a kind of unintended gift, a resonance across time, like the sound in that oracle chamber, still vibrating long after the voice has stopped. Sometimes I imagine standing in one of the lower chambers, lamp extinguished, complete darkness. No sound, no sense of scale, just breath and stone. In that moment, stripped of distraction, you'd be forced inward, into memory, fear, awe. That might have been the point all along. Not answers, but confrontation. With yourself, with mortality, with the unknown. And maybe that's why the Hypogeum feels so relevant now. We're surrounded by noise, information, constant stimulation. Very few spaces ask us to be quiet and present. Very few experiences guide us deliberately into uncertainty. This ancient place does exactly that, even in fragments. It invites stillness. It resists consumption. It demands respect. So when you zoom out and look at the Hypogeum, not just as an archaeological site, but as an idea, it becomes something more universal. It's about humanity's need to mark transitions, to to create spaces where the ordinary rules are suspended, where you step out of daily life and into something symbolic, communal, and deeply human. That need hasn't gone away. We've just changed how we try to satisfy it. In the end, I think the Hypogeum survives because it touches something fundamental. It reminds us that before we were engineers, before we were historians, before we were consumers of information, we were participants in shared meaning. We gathered, descended, listened, and emerged changed. That pattern is ancient, and it's still inside us. And maybe that's the quiet power of this place beneath Malta. Not that it hides secrets we'll someday decode, but that it reflects questions we'll never stop asking. Who are we? How do we face death? How do we connect with something larger than ourselves? The Hypogeum doesn't answer those questions. It holds space for them. And sometimes, holding space is the most enduring act of all.